Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello, I'm Colonie Town Judge Peter Crummey, and welcome to Benchmark. We'll explore a variety of issues involving our criminal justice system, our legal system, and how they intersect with the citizens of the town of Colonie. Today, we're truly fortunate to have one of the most distinguished attorneys in the state of New York. It's my great pleasure to welcome Senator John Dunne with us today on Benchmark. Many of you know that Senator Dunne served 24 years in the New York State Senate in a variety of capacities, including as chair of the Environmental Conservation Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the Insurance Committee, and ultimately serving as Deputy Majority Leader with Warren Anderson. Senator Dunne continued his legal experience serving as a United States Assistant Attorney General responsible for the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C., working with then President George Bush. We're very lucky and fortunate to have Senator Dunne with us today, and thank you very much for joining us, Senator.
My pleasure, Judge. Good to be back with an old friend.
Well, I'm so happy, and if speaking of being old friends too, I just wanted to show you a photograph that I've had in my law office for well over 20 years. And 22 years ago this June, this photo was taken of you, Warren Anderson, and me. Obviously, I look much younger, but no one else does. But I love Warren Anderson's comment on his letter to me at the time that he signed the photograph, telling me that it was his pleasure to sign the photograph, but he can just hear people in the future asking, who is that standing between you and John Dunne? What a special man, and what a relationship you had with him.
He was a very dear friend.
And your years in the Senate, dynamic times, impacting a variety of state laws which still visit us today. Very few attorneys, actually, in the state of New York have had the impact on state law that you have. And that's why it's so vital and that you're here with us today. High points in the state Senate over 24 years. Anything that you'd like to share with us about your experience on behalf of the citizens of Nassau County and the state of New York?
Well, there's a great variety of assignments I had by the Majority Leader. I started out as the chair of the Committee on Crime and Corrections, which took me to Attica Prison in September of 1971 to attempt to negotiate a settlement between the rioting prisoners and the officials. That unfortunately wound up in tragedy, but the result of it was some pretty good reform laws which came up. Environmental chairman, we enacted the first acid rain legislation in the entire country. An example followed not only by the federal government, but many other states. When I chaired Judiciary, we gave the Court of Appeals, our state's highest court, the authority to determine which cases would come before the court, thereby providing a greater efficiency and selectivity of cases involving issues which were truly vital to the people of the state. And as Majority Leader, I had the opportunity of working as Warren Anderson's right arm, and it was really thrilling to debate every day on the floor. Great for an ego for a lawyer who's a litigator. So it was a very rewarding career and very privileged, served 13 terms, and the people in Nassau County were always very generous in their support.
Well, it was also great for me as a young attorney being on the staff of the State Senate as well, watching you lead the floor debate during your time there as well. And many of us learned so many things from you that you might not have even realized they were learning at the time. How did you get involved in politics on Long Island as a young man?
I always wanted to be a lawyer, and I always wanted to be an elected official. And always goes back 70 years. the first time Tom Dewey ran for governor in 1938. I remember going to the polls with my parents, and one of the poll watchers gave me a Dewey for governor button, and I woke up the next day to find out that Herbert Lehman had defeated him. But I stuck with it. 1940, I handed out literature, did lit drops as campaign workers do. I was 10 years of age. I was always involved in high school and college politics. When I came home, I got active in the Young Republicans. I was chairman of the County Young Republicans. Was very active in the bar, very active in the community, and always had my eye on running for office and having an identity in the community and being active in the party. After there was redistricting in the mid-1960s and there was a Senate seat opening, I was put forward, and as they say, the rest is history. Yes,
and that's correct, and very exciting times for us. Now, Nelson Rockefeller was also presiding at that time.
Oh, indeed. We had the latter stages of probably the greatest era in executive leadership of our state. He was my hero. He was a great man, great vision, a lot of vigor. He was willing to take a chance. Unlike many politicians today, he was willing to risk political capital to achieve a goal that he thought was worthy of a collective response. And it was a great thrill to work with Nelson Rockefeller.
Well, it's exciting times, and so many developments occurred with his leadership and, of course, your participation. So many things, too numerous to tell, but certainly our own higher education system certainly advanced during that time.
I think that's Rockefeller's greatest legacy for New York State. Right. When you think of countless, hundreds of thousands of young people in New York State would not have had the opportunity for higher education were it not for the state university system with its, I think, 57 different campuses.
Have you seen state government evolve, or even during your time, did state government evolve or the legislative process evolve in any? I mean, when Rockefeller was here, I suppose that he may have had a great influence on both houses of the legislature.
Indeed he did. He knew how to work with people. And he understood, not to be trite, but he knew that everybody wanted something. And he had this great knack of knowing, what is it, Judge, that you need that I can give you? Because frankly, I want you to do something for me. He really knew how to, if you will, horse trade, which seems to have been absent from the legislative scene for the last couple of decades.
Right. Well, hopefully things will move forward in that regard. Of course, after while you were serving admirably in the state Senate, you were also practicing law. Is that correct?
Oh, indeed. I always maintained a law practice to provide a certain amount of independence. I had to keep my family in mind. When I went to Albany in '66, my wife was at home with 4 children, 5 years and under, and I've always had that responsibility. And I didn't want my family's condition to be dependent upon politics.
Well, it's a wise man, and certainly some of your wisdom was developed early on through your education. Your educational training is second to none, I believe. Graduate of Georgetown University and Yale Law School.
Yes.
Is that correct? Well, there's no two finer institutions of higher learning in the United States, and obviously they're very proud to call you one of their own.
Particularly when they have the annual drive for the alumni.
Well, my dad attended Georgetown University as an undergrad as well, and of course I went to Boston College, so he's always teasing me that I attended the younger Jesuit university, and even today, I was with him this morning, we've talked about that. Both schools doing so well even today.
They certainly are.
And tell me about your experience. After 24 years in the Senate, you moved on and accepted a position by then President Bush. Tell us about that.
The Attorney General, Dick Thornburgh, was a longtime friend of mine with whom I had dealt over the years. And when I had told him that I was leaving the Senate to become the managing partner of a rather large law firm, he asked me whether I'd consider coming down and to be in the Justice Department. I said, no, I've really got to go to work on my law firm. Well, a couple of months later, he called me and asked me if I would consider being interviewed by the White House for appointment as the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Civil Rights Division. And having been in public service most of my life, that was an opportunity I couldn't afford to pass up. And our children were all out of the house. They were educated. And my wife has always been a great support, said, by all means, let's do it. So I went to Washington, served, unfortunately, first President Bush had only one term, but maybe it was, everything works out for the best. But I have nothing but happy memories, both as a professional and as a concerned citizen.
Now, you must have been active in so many types of cases in your capacity as the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Civil Rights Division. Any particular types of cases that you found yourself involved with which are of note to our citizens?
I think very significantly. First of all, the charge for the department was to see to the enforcement of all federal civil rights legislation that had to deal with voting, housing, anything that would involve an issue. Probably the most outstanding case was the case when Rodney King was beaten badly by police officers in Los Angeles. And in the spirit of federalism, we deferred, although it was a violation of both federal statute and state, we deferred to the state to prosecute. And a jury acquitted the police officers, but we felt that as a separate sovereignty, the federal government, this was such an egregious case, which some will remember was captured on tape by a passing citizen. We felt that it should be prosecuted. I had to make the decision whether to make the presentation of the grand jury. We did. There was a trial, there was conviction, and the wrongdoers were sent to prison. Probably one of the most important assignments I had was to determine whether the redistricting of congressional and legislative districts was in conformity with the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution. It had come right after the national census, and under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it fell to me individually to make the decisions whether or not redistricting by state legislatures was in accordance with the Constitution. That was probably the heaviest assignment I had there. I spent perhaps 50% of my time working on those cases. It involved some very important issues. And to his credit, the Attorney General, unlike what we've been reading about over the last few years, said to me one day, "This is your responsibility. I don't want to get involved. Just do the right thing." Boom. That was the end of it. I never heard anything further from the front office. And it was a heavy assignment, but I couldn't have done it without the dedicated support of the career personnel at the Justice Department, men and women who were committed to the principles of civil rights, and they gave me their best judgment, which helped me to make these decisions.
Well, that's a very a tremendous task, and they were fortunate to have you at the helm at that time.
I was fortunate to be there.
There are other significant pieces of legislation that passed through your office in the Civil Rights Division, including the Americans with Disabilities Act as well. And tell us about how that came about.
Well, I think I consider that bill to be as important and ranked with the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65. It responded to the need to help the 43 million disabled Americans to find their way into the mainstream of American society. And it provided careful delineation as to what activities are protected, what the penalties were, but most significantly, it set up a whole series of programs to help not only those who needed the assistance of that legislation, but also those who were going to enforce it and to open up business, social, commercial opportunities for the disabled. It is now the largest single unit within the Civil Rights Division, and we never anticipated that there would be this type of response. But with the enforcement responsibilities, you at least get the satisfaction that you're helping an awful lot of people.
Well, it's certainly had an impact all the way down into the local level.
Oh, indeed.
Certainly it has an impact on building codes and construction issues and a variety of occupancy issues. It's all the way at the very basis level.
Yeah,
You know?
it has been costly for businesses and municipalities who have to conform with those standards, but I think it's small compared with the benefits in terms of human rights and the sheer opportunity for enjoyment of equal rights by so many of our fellow Americans.
Now, going back to the Rodney King case, and of course that was international news,
Indeed it was.
And just as an attorney, curious by me as to how the state system can prosecute and ultimately possibly found not guilty, the defendants found not guilty, then the federal system can likewise prosecute. What about double jeopardy? How does that all work?
Well, first you start out with the recognition that there are two sovereignties: the federal government, all of the people of the United States, and recognizing in the spirit of federalism the sovereignty of each and every one of the states. And I think in accord with then President Bush's approach was that these specific incidents which affect a particular community, even as large as Los Angeles or the state of California, you should defer to them to determine the right or wrong of those individuals' acts. However, that decision having been made, we were vigilant to the whole process, but we felt when the Orange County jury came in with a not guilty verdict, that there was what was done to Rodney King was so horrendous and clearly violative of federal statutes that we were justified in prosecuting under federal statute. But that since there were two sovereignties, there's not the problem of double jeopardy.
Well, that's a great legal issue, and thank you for
It is.
setting that forth. You've been involved in the practice of law for 53 years.
I have.
And not only and had an impact locally, statewide, and federally as well. I note that at one point during your practice, you were involved in the Nassau County Bar Association. Is that correct?
I was the youngest president in the history of the Nassau County Bar Association. But I was very much involved. I was a member of the first House of Delegates of the state bar. I was a member of the American Bar Association House of Delegates. My commitment to the profession has been consistent, and it's been a great privilege to be part of a professional organization whose goal is not simply the advancement of the profession, but the betterment of the community at large. And as a legislator during the 70s, I'd go to these ABA House of Delegates meetings. I'd find that lawyers from around the country were talking about issues which we were only beginning to look at in the state legislature. You learn so much from being with people outside your own little area.
Right.
And it was a great incentive, not only for me as an individual, but a tremendous resource, having all that experience to bring into focus in the drafting of legislation here in New York.
Well, I find my own experience involved as a director of the Albany County Bar Association to be helping me continue to enjoy the wisdom that it takes in order to serve as an attorney.
I hope you'll stay with it.
You know, and we will stay with it, and I look forward to continuing my involvement there and in that way. You're practicing law now. You're back from Washington. You've been practicing law for 15 years at Whiteman, Osterman, and Hanna here in Albany, New York. Mm-hmm. And I think the founders, the founding partners, worked for Rockefeller early on. Is that correct?
All of them were. Michael Whiteman was Governor Rockefeller's counsel. Mel Osterman was the Director of Employment Relations. John Hanna was counsel to the Office of Conservation and Recreation. Joel Hodes was involved in the employment area too. So those four found themselves unemployed one January 1st, and they formed what has become a leading firm here in the Capital Region.
Well, they benefit by your affiliation, certainly. And what do you find the types of cases that you're involved with now?
I've tried to stick pretty much to employment law, environmental law, some civil rights matters. I characterize myself as a utility infielder. I can fill a number of positions, and being at my stage of career, I can help younger lawyers At least I think I do.
Well, you continue to do that.
And I'm very much involved in the community activities.
Well, that's for sure. Your interest in public service has continued throughout your professional career. And I note that recently you've served on a special commission that was impaneled by former Chief Judge Judith Kaye, and the Commission on the Future of Indigent Defense Services. And you were one of the celebrated commission members, and a report was issued just about 18 months ago in connection with that, or so, in connection with your findings about indigent defense services. And of course, you and I often hear about that through the public defense system and the conflict defender system and the 18B system. And tell me what your commission considered and what globally some of your recommendations were to the Chief Judge.
We had a very extensive study made not only of New York State but around the country with regard to, I'd have to characterize as the failure of government to meet the obligation under the Constitution to provide counsel to everyone in a criminal situation where that individual cannot afford to retain counsel of their own. It's a subject I've been involved in for 50 years. My first job in government was law secretary in the county court of Nassau County, which was the felony criminal court. And on a daily basis, you'd see people coming into court with not being represented or not being adequately represented. And as a result of that, I got very much involved in legal aid and set up a system in Nassau County. My interest has continued. The main charge here, following this extensive survey, both nationally as well as in New York, was to point out how inadequate New York has in responding to the need to provide counsel for those who are indigent. And this is not a personal matter, but at the court in which you sit, the town and village justice courts, there was the greatest need for an improvement. I know that in the town of Colonie you have an excellent system, and I think that it's a great tribute to those who are working with you, not only on the bench, but also who make it possible, asking the taxpayers to fund these programs. So our proposal, the principal proposal in that report, is for the creation of a statewide independent commission which would coordinate the activities of each and every county. Once again, deferring in the spirit of federalism. The folks down there on the firing line know what's best for the people in their community.
Right.
But to provide backup and coordination and the setting of standards for any program. The commission would have to be independent, but by the same token, it wouldn't be telling the local people what they should or should not do. The idea was to provide some uniformity so that we could meet the constitutional guarantee. And we've continued to work on this, had meetings only last week with people in the governor's office. It has their attention. Governor Patterson, when he was the Senate Minority Leader, was a fierce advocate for this. And I think you have to be realistic. There probably is not enough money to fund a massive program at this stage, but what we should do is, as recommended in that report, set up a group to study and propose implementation of such a program. I think we've got to get this moving because every day is one more day of failing to meet the constitutional standard.
Well, in reading the report and to the Chief Judge and to the citizens of the state of New York, I note that there were even some commission members that were advocating immediate and direct creation of the system. And I suppose to some degree, the financial realities of some of the things that are so vitally necessary lead to a slower rollout, but nonetheless, yeah. It's on its way.
Well, what's interesting, you point out that some of those who want action right now, let's go. They were the members of the commission who were on a daily basis in the trenches, working on these, witnessing the shortcomings despite their commitment to it. Right. They recognized the shortcomings and their sense of urgency, which all of us had, but maybe some of us who are tempered by politics realize, let's get this going, but we're not going to be able to go full speed ahead immediately.
And looking at this issue, like so many other legal issues that you have dealt with throughout your entire career, do you see differences, obvious differences in how law is practiced in the city of New York as opposed to upstate or as opposed to Long Island? Is it handled in any different way that has a different impact in any way? Or did New York City commission members have a different viewpoint as to how things could get done?
No, but I think the city folk didn't realize what was going on around the rest of the state. They didn't realize how serious it was. They were excellent lawyers, community leaders who were involved there from the city of New York, who had enough breadth of view in order to recognize that, yes, there are different problems in various sections of the state, but they supported the basic issue of what was not being met. No, there's no upstate, downstate attitude with regard to the urgency and legitimacy of this effort that we're trying to advance.
Senator, you've served as the chairman of the Standing Committee of the New York State Senate on Judiciary. You've served on a variety of commissions impacting New York state law. Few attorneys today in the state of New York have had the impact on state and federal law that you have had. What do you see as the future of the judiciary 50 years from now? What would you see? Would you see it functioning differently than it does today? Or would you advocate that it does?
Oh, yes. I've been a strong advocate for so-called court reform. As former Chief Judge Judith Kaye said, court reform is not for the short-winded. The proposals for merging and simplifying the court system, which was a creature of the Tweed Commission back in the 1950s, is still very much a subject of debate for a number of reasons: efficiency, cost, quality of justice. I think that we've got to simplify our current system of courts. Very, very politically sensitive. Don't fool around with my courts, is what a lot of legislators will tell you quietly.
Right.
But I see it moving in that direction for a simplified system of courts. I see a growing tendency for better selection methods for judges. I don't think we'll ever get to the point where all of our judges will be appointed like the federal system. They're lifetime appointments by the president. But what I've been working for so many years on is some kind of qualification standards, to have legally recognized screening committees to determine who is or who is not qualified to run for office. It's a very complicated, emotional issue, but those are the two things that I see coming. A third will be a tendency due to economics of going to non-judicial media or venues for handling disputes. Arbitration will become increasingly important. Mediation, which is non-binding on the parties. Hey, come on, why don't you two folks get together? Why don't we sit down and talk about this and keep it out of court? I think you're going to find a trend in that direction. So 50 years from now, you and I are going to be practicing before more efficient courts, courts which can deliver justice more quickly. It will be a system where I think you'll have higher qualified judges, and you'll have a system whereby litigants, rich, poor, or otherwise, will have good representation to the constitutional standard.
Now, the Chief Judge, former Chief Judge, had pointed out some of her concerns about town and village court systems and how some seem to be typically sophisticated and well-run, and others weren't at that level. Almost akin to the commission that you served on for indigent defense services, finding in some areas excellent service, in other areas less than excellent. And her concern seemed to be that some courts weren't traveling at the same high pace as others. What do you see for the future of the justice court system? Any modifications or changes other than the ones that we've been inundated with over the last couple of years?
I believe that 50 years from now we will still have village and town justice courts. I think they are essential. However, This study, as well as a great many others, have identified many of the weaknesses in the court. Once again, there's got to be some uniformity. There has to be better training for the judges. In fact, Judge Kaye took a step on that by doubling the number of days that town and village justices have to have in the way of training. There's been an increase in resources. My judgment, from having been in politics as well as in the bar and government for over half a century, is that those courts are going to remain. They are essential, I think, to having the public have some confidence and trust in the court system. Not to trivialize the work of those courts. They involve lesser crimes. They involve matters involving smaller or lesser amounts of money. But those go to the fiber, the real daily life of the men and women in the community. And I think the public has to have confidence that there's some place they can go to assert their rights, to have their rights defended. But by the same token, they want to have it by people who understand them. The morality and the sense of the community has to be reflected in the way justice is delivered to the community. And that's why I've been a strong advocate of strengthening the lower level courts because they know and understand the public. So a new, streamlined, better qualified, better resourced system of courts for the village and towns, I think will last a long time, even when you and I are thinking about retirement.
Well, certainly the entire legal system in the state of New York has benefited by your involvement and your insight into the future. Living in Columbia County now, is that right, Senator?
It's heaven. It certainly is.
But
and
certainly,
don't tell my friends in Nassau that.
Well, that's okay. They were fortunate to enjoy you. You're born in Nassau County, is that correct? Well, we're lucky to call you one of ours now, and of course, so is the entire state of New York. And we're so happy that you joined us. John Dunne, thank you very much for coming here today and sharing some of your expertise with the citizens of the town of Colonie.
Well, thank you, Judge Crummey, and thank you for what you're doing.
I'm Judge Peter Crummey, and thank you for joining me on Benchmark.